This right here is what's known as the VAERS system, which stands for the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System. It was set up all the way back in the year 1990, so 32 years ago, as essentially an early warning system in order to detect any possible safety problems that arose from vaccines. Now, in terms of organizational structure, VAERS is run jointly by the CDC as well as by the FDA. And the way that the system works is that it both accepts as well as analyzes the reports of adverse events following vaccination in order to try to determine whether those adverse events were actually caused by the vaccine in question. Now, technically, anyone can report an adverse event to the VAERS system, meaning you, your grandma, your aunt, and anybody else can all report the adverse events that they experience following vaccination to VAERS. They actually have a fairly easy-to-use online reporting tool. You can see it up on screen for yourself. However, while everyday Americans like you and me can report our adverse events to the VAERS system, there are other people who must report them. For instance, healthcare professionals are required to report certain adverse events that they see, while vaccine manufacturers are required to report all adverse events that come to their attention. However, because VAERS has this self-reporting component to it, it's officially classified as a passive reporting system. Here's, for instance, how it's described on the official government website. Quote, VAERS is a passive reporting system, meaning it relies on individuals to send in reports of their experiences to the CDC and the FDA. VAERS is not designed to determine if a vaccine caused a health problem, but it's especially useful for detecting unusual or unexpected patterns of adverse event reporting that might indicate a possible safety problem with a vaccine. Meaning, in plain English, that VAERS is not to determine causation, but only to recognize patterns that are emerging in the broader population. And so today, let's take a look at what has been reported within the VAERS system so far in regards to the COVID vaccines, and see if we can, as the websites say, detect any unusual or unexpected patterns of adverse events. So with that in mind, let's start with a high-level overview and compare what's been reported for the COVID vaccines over the past 2 years versus what's been reported for all other vaccines over the past 30 years. Before we start, I have to give a big shout out to the VAERSanalysis.info website, who actually pulls a lot of this data together in a simple and easy to access format. If you'd actually like to see some of their visualizations, I'll throw a link to that website. It'll be down in the description box below. And now let's delve into the data for ourselves. In terms of the number of adverse reactions, over the past 2 years, the COVID vaccines have seen a staggering 1,447,520 reports. Compare that to only 903,917 reports that were submitted for all other vaccines combined over the past 30 years. Then, in terms of the number of life-threatening events, the COVID vaccines have seen 34,619 records, while all other vaccines combined have only 14,751. When we look at the number of hospitalizations, the COVID vaccines have a staggering 181,555, while all other vaccines, again combined, have had only 85,749. In terms of the number of permanent disabilities post-vaccination, the COVID vaccines have 59,374 records, while all other vaccines combined have only 21,454. In terms of the number of birth defects recorded after vaccination, the COVID vaccines have 1,174 records, while all other vaccines combined have only 205. And lastly, in terms of the number of deaths, the COVID vaccines have a total of 31,696 records compared to only 9,962 records for all other vaccines. And just to highlight that last point, this means that just in terms of these VAERS records, the number of deaths that are associated with the COVID vaccines just over the past 2 years alone is more than triple the number of deaths that are associated with every other vaccine within the VAERS system combined since the year 1990. Now again, though, as I mentioned at the top of the episode, correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation, although we'll get to that later in the episode. However, right now, let's actually explore this data a bit further through the use of some graphs. Up on your screen is a graph going back to 1990 when the VAERS system was just created, and the lines in yellow represent the number of deaths reported for all other vaccines combined, while the blue lines starting in the year 2020 represent the number of deaths reported for the COVID vaccines. And as you can see, the 2021 and 2022 numbers are just off the charts. And of course, I should mention here that the year 2022 is not over yet. And then just as another visualization for how steep this difference actually is, take a look at this chart here, which presents that same data in a bit of a different way. Since the year 2020, the rise in reported cases of death for the COVID vaccines, the blue line, has been so steep that quite literally, in just 2 years, it's been triple the cumulative amount of reports of the yellow line, which is all other vaccines combined. Now, let's break up that yellow line into the individual vaccines that they represent and take a look at this chart here. It shows the number of reported deaths broken down by vaccine type since the year 1990. And at the top, you have things like the Ebola vaccine, the adenovirus vaccine, cholera vaccine, rubella vaccine, and so on, which have seen deaths reported only in these single digits. However, going down to the bottom of the chart, we have things like the influenza vaccine, which is commonly known as the flu shot. We have the pneumonia vaccine, then the diphtheria vaccine, which was, by the way, up until the year 2020, the vaccine with the most number of reported deaths. However, very obviously, the entire scale of the graph needed to be adjusted with the COVID vaccine, which has quite literally 10 times the reported number of deaths than the number 2 vaccine, diphtheria. And if we want to look a little closer at the COVID vaccine specifically, we can actually stratify that data by age, and we get this chart here. The red indicates the total number of reported deaths, whereas the blue indicates the ratio, the number of deaths reported for every million doses of the vaccine delivered. And as you can see, these numbers, well, they vary quite widely depending on the age of the recipient. For kids younger than 2, while the number of deaths is low, sitting at about 7, the ratio is very high, sitting at about 16 deaths reported for every million doses of the vaccine. However, when you go to the right side of the chart, which is people over the age of 65, which is the demographic that is the most vaccinated, you'll see the highest number of overall deaths, sitting at around 10,000, and simultaneously the highest ratio, sitting at a whopping 178 reported deaths per million vaccine doses administered. Then, looking at the VAERS data from another angle, we can also see the number of deaths stratified based on the time that the person got vaccinated. That's this chart right here. As you can see, about a third of the cases of reported deaths occurred within a week of the person getting vaccinated. The rest of the reported deaths were spread out over the course of the next 2.5 months post-vaccination. That if we stratify this data by vaccine manufacturer, we find that the Johnson & Johnson vaccine had 2,752 records, Moderna had 8,599 records, and Pfizer had the lion's share with 20,251 records of death. Furthermore, if we take this VAERS data and stratify it by gender, we see that the majority of these deaths, 53%, were men. Women represented only 41%, and the rest were unknown. Now, so far we've been looking exclusively at the charts for the number of reported deaths.